Ladies and gentlemen, I have Bill Holter and Annie Hoffman from Miles Franklin back on the line. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me.
A pleasure.
Good morning.
Good morning. Guys, I want to set the stage, and either of you can jump in with your impressions and reactions to this, but do you guys recall the shenanigans that went on below ground with the gold stored beneath the World Trade Center on 9/11? Because in a Times Online article dated November 1st, 2001, Mayor Giuliani was quoted as saying $230 million in gold had been recovered from the wreckage of the World Trade Center. However, it's widely known that the COMEX was storing closer to $950 million worth of gold, and that, of course, is in 2001 prices when gold was, what, $250, $260, $270 an ounce. So it begs the question, why only $230 million recovered? And I want to take it a step further and remind you that Reuters reported that the $230 million Giuliani spoke of in gold was discovered in the back of a 10-wheeled truck along with several cars in a delivery tunnel under World Trade Center 5. The reason I bring this up is with New York City now underwater, I'm just waiting for the New York Federal Reserve Bank to tell the Germans that their gold floated away. Guys, what do you think about all this?
Well, as far as World Trade Center, you're saying World Trade Center 5, which is one of the other buildings. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. That's one. It's part of the World Trade Center 7-building complex.
Right, because obviously if anyone claims they found anything under buildings 1 and 2, that's a crock, because they can't even find bodies.
It's been said that World Trade Center 4 stored a tremendous amount of gold on behalf of Scotiabank, the COMEX and its customers, J.P. Morgan, et cetera, et cetera. And, the theory is that a lot of that gold went missing on 9/11. But really, okay.
Which direction was the truck headed? Out or in?
Yeah.
That would be my first question.
Yeah. So, but here's the thing. I mean, doesn't it beg the question now, when we know that the central banks don't even trust each other, as you've written recently, Bill, the jig is up. I mean, it's clear that the criminality has been going on in the system for much longer than the last decade, but it's really hitting the apex now where we can all see it. The criminality is so blatant that the criminal banks, they don't even trust each other.
Well, how is it that nobody even knew that 930 tons was moved in 2000, 2001. I mean, how does that come up now 11, 12 years after the fact?
Right, and then we have the Bundesbank immediately putting out their statements. Don't worry, we're on top of this. We get assurance every year. I mean, it's the same thing we get from the U.S. government at everything. They gave us assurances there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and here we are, $4 trillion and millions of deaths later, and I'm including the Iraqi deaths, of course. And it turns out it was all lies. So why would I believe them about how much inventory of gold they have, of all things?
This basically just brings up more and more questions. I mean, it doesn't bring up answers. It brings up more questions. And we live in a fiat world where everything is based on trust, confidence, if you will, and this is definitely, one more blow to confidence. It's not only just citizens questioning their central bank. Like here in the United States, there hasn't been an audit since the 50s. So people are wondering, is the gold really there? Well, now you've got central banks asking questions.
And not just Germany, correct? I mean, the Netherlands is now...
There's a movement in the Netherlands also.
And not just about gold, for that matter. I mean, what we're seeing going on in Greece, for instance, where they one day say that this is their deficit, and then the next day they say, oh, sorry, it's 5 times what we said it was. And, this is spreading around the world. The populists, the central bankers themselves, the people who are the creditors of these nations. And so, yeah, you have a real juggling act going on, and what you have is more and more balls being thrown in the air, not less.
I have a friend of mine who lives in Canada who is a very smart guy, and he had the presence of mind recently to sell his house because, as you guys know, the Canadians are still going through a tremendous housing bubble, which might explain why their banks are still in good shape because the assets they have on their books, are still relatively valuable based on the bubble of the housing market up there in Canada. Anyway, he believes that bubble is soon to pop, and he sold his house, and he bought a lot of gold. And this is a guy who happens to be a very big silver bull. But more and more, it does seem like, a rational person would have both gold and silver, especially when we see the shenanigans going on between these banks. It makes me want to run out and buy as much gold as I can buy.
I think you need both, and for 2 separate reasons. gold is where your real wealth goes, but silver's going to spend. Gold will spend also, but how are you going to go with a 1-ounce coin and barter with it? You're not going to get your change back.
Right, and then, of course, you also have all the other issues. I mean, it's a simple diversification example here.
Yeah,
obviously, there's yeah, I mean, there could be confiscation. I mean, I'm not saying I believe there will be. I'm saying, why would you have all your eggs in one basket? And it's the same thing goes with storage. It's not for everyone, but you really have to consider the pros and cons of gold in your house versus gold away. You have to have the pros and cons of having all gold versus all silver. And like Bill said, certainly in the worst case scenario, you want to have as much silver as possible, particularly the junk silver, which is the lowest denomination you could buy.
Well, let's just get back to your article here. Central banks really don't trust each other, because I think it really, to me, symbolizes the fact that we are about to hit the tipping point, really the beginning of the end, because, you know, as long as all the central banks, it reminds me of those Mexican shootouts you see in the Tarantino movies where everybody's got a gun pointed at each other, and as long as no one shoots, everyone stays alive. You know,
exactly.
That's what it feels like. And it feels like if these central banks are now going to start, you know, ratting each other out, this thing could fall quickly. And you write in your article, I have a few questions that you might ask yourselves, which I believe the central banks have already asked themselves. Would the U.S. sell all of their gold to retain monetary power? Would they sell others' gold to which they are custodians for the same reasons? Is the financial system in the U.S. and globally more honest today than it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago?
First off, the system, people are not as honest as they were 20 years ago. They're not as honest as they were 50 years ago, 100 years ago. I mean, the moral fabric globally has declined to the point of starting to tear. So as far as secretly selling your own gold or secretly selling someone else's gold that you're holding for the, quote, the greater good, I think that's a very real possibility. Would you point fingers at someone else to get the limelight away from you? Well, of course. Look at what's happened with Europe in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, all the fingers have been pointed at Europe, and that was to get the spotlight off of the dire financial position that the U.S. has put itself in.
And if you go back in history, you know, Bill's talking about how it's less honest now. I mean, first of all, you can go back to Lincoln when he created the greenback, which almost destroyed the currency back in the Civil War. But when in 1933, when FDR confiscated gold, actually no one really gave any money in afterward. They had given it in beforehand because there was a plea to the nation: we need your gold because we need to get out of this depression. And of course, the dollars you get in return are gold back, so you can always get them back. And people did it patriotically. They believed in their government's honesty. Of course, once they did it and the government said you can't have it back and we're revaluing it higher, then they realized you can't trust your government about these kind of things. And when it comes to the U.S. holding their gold, when there's so much proof out there that they've leased and swapped it out, and you know what, even if they had all of it, it's only worth about $500 billion, which is nothing compared to the amount of debt and unfunded liabilities we have. So look, the U.S. wants to try to hold the world hostage with its reserve currency. The world's going to call that bluff, and that's what's going on right now.
Do the rumors that Fort Knox may not have all the gold that's claimed to be there start to make more sense to you guys? Does there start to be more validity in that idea now that we can see what's going on here between, you know, illegal leasing of gold? The Germans don't know if their gold is there. Nobody knows where the gold is. Gold was stolen on 9/11. Gold continues to be stolen, it seems, at every turn by the rich and powerful that control these central banks. I think it seems more and more rational that the gold in Fort Knox may not be there either.
Well, and this comes after years and years of uncovered fraud. Fraud has run rampant, and it just makes sense to ask that question. It's a question in everybody's mind: is the gold there? Unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand what it means if the gold is not there.
Right.
And if, we're talking about Fort Knox hasn't had an audit since the 1950s. Well, it turns out in all this Bundesbank shenanigans, it turns out they've never had an audit. So
right.
How on earth can anyone believe what they say? This goes back to people who they're all dead now, the people who were when they last had that gold there. And it's never been checked by anyone, and they refuse to let anyone look. So how could anyone believe that gold is there, let alone what's in Fort Knox?
To get back to something that Andy just mentioned, that the amount of gold that the U.S. has, 262 million ounces, supposedly, that works out to about 0.8 of an ounce for every citizen. It's nothing. If you go back to the late 70s, early 80s, when gold was $400 an ounce, it worked out to covering maybe half of our foreign debt. At $850, it basically covered our foreign debt. At $1,700, $1,750, it is minuscule. It's an inverted investment pyramid. In the old days, it used to be an investment pyramid. You had money at the bottom of the pyramid, and that money was real, that money was gold. Now we have an inverted investment pyramid where what holds this whole system up is credit. So it's like this pyramid is getting bigger and bigger and heavier, but yet it's floating. It's floating on top of debt. And there's no foundation, if it turns out that the central bank gold is not what it's supposed to be or claimed to be, then there's not even a point, the tip-top point of the pyramid is not even touching the ground.
Hey guys, thanks for watching part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, $43 trillion bankster lawsuit in Obamni 2012. No real change, ever. Click here. You can easily catch both parts 1 and 2 on my website SGT Report and check out thelibertymill.com. Real news 24/7. Thanks for watching.